All right, welcome to a very special episode of Cosmic Road where we are joined by the legendary Paola Harris. Thank you for coming on the show, Paola.
But I don't think of myself as legendary. I just think of myself as the Barbara Walters of ufology.
I love it. But no, you have, I mean, I don't want to date you, but you've been around for a while and you have really been investigating and researching some amazing stuff. And one thing I love about you is your open-mindedness and your energy. And you are an in-depth researcher, and you will get to the meat of whatever story you are working on. And I just love it. And I really appreciate your contributions to the field. And I can't wait to see where your journey takes you next.
Well, I hope I can still have a journey. Most of my materials, and I don't know if you know, I do word for word interviews because I don't know what's going on. Most of my audio tapes, the photographs I've taken, I'm a photojournalist. So if I'm interviewing like Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut, I have like a lot of pictures of him. And if I'm doing, in the pictures of Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff and all the remote viewers, Jacques and Alan Hynek and everything. All that is at Rice University in the Department of Religious Studies because I have donated it. I'm 79, so I can't leave things in my house just hanging out because I look at it. I look at it as the history of planet Earth. It's not ufology. I mean, these things happen. It's just like these things happen, like historical things happen. So if these things happen, then we need to talk about them and they need to be somewhere. So I am so grateful to Jeff Kripal in the Department of Religious Studies of all places in the Archives of the Impossible. Isn't that a great name for
I
where
love
all
that.
this is? And I'm there with Jacques Vallée, Whitley Strieber, Clifford Stone, Dr. John Mack, and me. And I'm the only woman. But I mean, all our stuff is there. So my dream has always been to have like students go there and just look through everything. It's going to be in the library. And wow.
Well, that's something that Grant Cameron talks about a lot is the need to preserve this information. And so that's great. It's cool that it's at Rice. I think of Rice as such a straight-laced university. It's neat that they have the archives of the impossible. I was actually born in Houston, and I spent a lot of time there. I have some friends that went to Rice, so it's neat. I don't think of Rice in that way. So that's really cool that they do that. But some of the most recent work you've been involved in is researching the Trinity case with Jacques Vallée, and y'all co-wrote a book on that. And I'm hoping we can get into the Trinity crash retrieval a little bit. I think it's a very important crash retrieval because it actually occurred before Roswell, which is
Yeah.
showing that the control group, as I call them, the shadowy group that does crash retrievals and reverse engineering and whatever else they do. They've been doing this since before Roswell, and I think it's very important to know. And a lot of people still think the Trinity case is a hoax. I don't, but I know some people are still tuning into that. Can you explain why it's not a hoax and take us through the Trinity crash itself and explain the significance of it?
Okay. Well, anyway, this is the latest version of Trinity because there's three versions, had to address some of the questions here. But Trinity is the name of where the atomic bomb was exploded. And the way this goes, when I was in Italy, and I lived in Italy teaching at the American Overseas School of Rome from 1992 to 2007, I had read in the Socorro newspaper about two little boys that had seen a crash in 1945 and that the location was there. The boys were alive, but the boys, when I was reading this, were in their 70s. And that this was something very important. And my thoughts were, I had already talked to all the Roswell people. I interviewed Walter Hott and I interviewed the mortician Glenn Dennis. I interviewed them all, so I knew that had happened. But when I heard that these little boys actually witnessed this event, my first thought was, why aren't my colleagues jumping on this? And my big criticism of opinion is not research. If you're going to call it a hoax, go down there, look at where the mark of the UFO is, talk to the witnesses, talk to the 4 witnesses, see what was going on, and then have a conversation, not out of the clear blue sky, everything's a hoax. And as I was telling you, we had this conversation before, our own people are the first one to yell hoax. And since we're field researchers, what happened to me was destiny. I came back to live in the United States in 2007, and the son of the pilot that flew over that area, it was his last assignment, William Brophy, called me and said, my father saw 2 little Indian boys when he flew over that crash site. Well, my God, they weren't Indian, they were Hispanic, but they were on horseback. And the thing is that I said to the son of the pilot, the bomber pilot, and he sent me his father's pictures and his military record and everything. I said, how can I get hold of those kids? They're not kids anymore. I said, but I'd love to cover this story. And I had to talk to Remy Baca before he trusted me for at least 3 months on the phone before I flew to his house in Gig Harbor, Washington. Now, those boys were 9 and 6, almost 7. And what I didn't know is that Timothy Good, one of the greatest field researchers in the world, had already been there. He didn't talk to Remy Baca. It was already in his book, Earth and Alien Enterprise. So will people get a clue this is not a hoax? And then I didn't realize, and I talked to Ryan Wood about this, that Ryan Wood's book, Magic Eyes Only, had that crash in there, 1945 San Antonio crash. It's really called San Antonio, that little village. And so those 2 guys already had that. By the time I got there and questioned Remy, and it's a good thing I did, and this is an example of how I work. This was on my own dime. I flew to Gig Harbor, Washington. I talked to him. I got a story from him that's the exact story of the 9-year-old who was living in California. They hadn't seen each other in almost 50 years. And so I got his story, and then he dies in 2013. And when he died in 2013, I went to Socorro to talk to the 9-year-old. And I wasn't with Jock yet. I was just doing this because I went down there 3 times a year to collect information. When I first got there, I was able to see the crash site. There is a circle. Nothing grows in the middle. It's totally arid. It is 13 miles from Trinity and 3 miles from the Owl Bar and Cafe. So I'm asking Jose, did you see Oppenheimer? Because that's where his cabin was. And he goes, oh yeah, I saw him. He used to come in with a hat. And then he takes me out Bar Cafe, and I talked to the people that own it, and they thought, well, those Manhattan guys, we thought they were traveling salesmen, because it was big top secret. I mean, nobody. And those same guys, those same people that worked on that, the young guys that did the recovery for 1 week, and you need to read Trinity about this, were the same guys that Jose and Remy knew, because they were always hanging out there. It was a local water hole. It was the only grocery store. And behind the Owl Barn Cafe are the cabins of the Manhattan Project, including Oppenheimer. So I'm putting together all this history and talking to the actual people, and that's what has to happen. And, and so these 2 boys were on the Padilla farm. They hear a big thud, a big bang like the atomic bomb. They thought it was a second bomb. Jose Padilla, the 9-year-old, lost his hearing when the bomb went off. His mother opened the door at 5:45 or what in the morning that day, and she was blinded in one eye. They were not told what was going to happen in that area. So this is history. We're looking at history. And so the 2 boys think, oh, this is happening again, because they hear this noise. They see the smoke. They go over there. They see an avocado-shaped craft with a little dome. They get very confused, because in those days, there's no Kenneth Arnold. Hasn't happened yet. There's nothing in the history books. There's no magazines. They don't even know what a UFO is. And so the thing is, they see this thing. they see a panel that has been blown off, and then I'll talk about the panel later, and they see three little beings. Now, Danny Sheehan has just questioned Jose Padilla in California and finds him 1,000% credible, because the boys, when they went up there, thought those were children. They didn't know what was sliding back and forth. And Danny asked Jose, he said, "What, did you hear anything?" And Jose said, "Yeah, they were squealing like when you kill a rabbit, or like baby sound. You can't make that up." And both of them had the same story. So, and they weren't living in the same place. Now, people will say, well, why did they keep quiet so long? Because after 7 days of recovery, Jose, which was the mischievous one, the 9-year-old, when all the young boys went to the El Bar and Cafe before they took the flatbed truck out of there, Jose jumps on the flatbed, goes inside the craft, and pulls a piece off the wall. He's not going to tell the world that he took something. I mean, I wouldn't either. And he hid it for 60 years. And the thing is that when he did that, he didn't know. He was a kid. He wanted a souvenir. And there was this thing on the wall that looked like a handle, but there was a silver circle and a copper circle, and this thing rotated. So in order to take it off, he took what he calls a cheater bar or crowbar, and he pulled it off, and he said the pin fell on the floor. I mean, detail like crazy. And so I'm listening to this story, and what Jacques is interested in, I'm on it for 5 years, and what Jacques is interested in when he came on, and he worked on it for 5 years with me. So, 10 years of a hoax, come on. The thing is that what had happened was that he kept going back to the same place with me, and thinking that maybe there were other pieces. And in that area, he explained more and more of what happened. Now, Remy is dead, but Remy had told me about the angel hair that fell out of that one panel on that door. And he said it scattered all over the mesquite. And he said that the boys said they collected it because it was all lit up. It had purple, yellow, pink lights on, all lit up. And there was no electricity. So the kids didn't know it was UFO. They thought what was inside was kids. They pick up this angel hair stuff and they trim the Christmas trees because there's no electricity and the thing is all lit. And I found 2 other witnesses that got part of the fiber optics, or they call it angel hair. And one of the Sabrina Padilla, the cousin, the 7-year-old, said there was also aluminum metal, which she used to crush, and it went back to the same shape. And she said, we had no toys in those days, so I used to play with it. Because what had happened is Jose's father went on the property and found the leftover stuff. So, it's so detailed that I can't have a conversation with people who didn't read the book. It's like, can you read the book and then we can have conversation over whatever? And then what had happened with Jacques and me is that a NASA scientist and several people came to see it, and they were totally convinced what they wanted to do at the end. And I think we're just closing the story down now, because 10 years is a lot, is they wanted to use ground penetrating radar. I mean, in case you find pieces, but I'm not convinced that metal is the way to prove anything. I think witness testimony of 2 children who have the same story, who grew up far away from each other, very same story. And then the other witnesses I found is the way to do it.
And you can still see the imprint of this craft. Is that correct?
I haven't even told you. Because I kept going back, I noticed that somebody was adding dirt to the area. Then they planted these poisonous plants there that one of my colleagues had an anaphylactic reaction to the plants. And the plants are only in the circle where the craft, nowhere else in the property. We went everywhere else to look for these plants. So if you look at the book, you see Jacques picking up with one of the people that works with me, Bill Crowley, a sample of the plants that were there. and the sample was cocklespur, which is very, very, very toxic. So why would that be planted just in the circle to keep us away? Because somebody's uncomfortable that we're going here. But Jacques was telling me that because when we had talked to Chris Mellon, he was involved too. He questioned one of the witnesses, Sabrina, that the government is looking at the first crash being 1945, not 1947. So so there's new research. So get over it. Yeah, and there doesn't have to be. We didn't want to talk about where it was because we don't want a McDonald's there. We don't want people buying T-shirts and doing everything that gets done around these places. This is a sacred spot. I mean, you can see Trinity site right between the mountains where it is. But I want to add one thing. I had done some research on a document that Ryan Wood and his father, Bob Wood, who just died. They did the MJ-12 documents, and there is a document by Einstein and Oppenheimer to President Truman saying that there was problems with UFOs before Roswell, because this document is dated June of 1947. Roswell is July. So they're saying we have a problem. We need to look at the United Nations. What do we do with these cosmic? It's called inhabitants. Relationships with inhabitants of celestial bodies. I think I sent you that document. If I didn't send it to you, I will send it to you. And it's before Roswell. So what crash are they talking about? There could only be one that they're talking about.
Also, I think it was in the UAP disclosure amendment, and they got passed in the NDAA, and it's a neutered version of it a couple of years ago. They were talking about declassifying UFO records historically going back to 1945.
But you got to look at, people will go, why did it crash? It's a problem with the chronology of when these things happen in the area where we exploded the atomic bomb. So Enola Gay was stationed in Roswell. The 509 bomb squadron was at Roswell. The Manhattan Project, I think Einstein already knew before that, though. But Oppenheimer, is in shock, because naturally when something like this happens, I know for a fact I've seen all the latest UFO sightings, and they're over war zones. Whatever is visiting, and don't ask me who they are, if they're good or bad, and all those crazy questions. Whatever is visiting is interested in our capacity to destroy ourselves.
Yeah, that's encouraging. That's encouraging. Well, nicer if they were hanging out over hospitals, healing people and stuff. Although there are cases of them healing people.
Chile friendship case, and that's exactly what they were doing on the island of Chiloé. And if Paola Harris is going to do that, she's going to go to Chile, and she's going to speak to the original people that met these things. And I did. I spoke to Octavio Ortiz, and he told me that they were human-like. Then they came and they talked to him in Fuentes. I have to go to the places and talk to the people. What am I going to sit in my house and say, oh, God, that sounds so crazy. So
See, that's what I was talking about. I admire your energy and your ability to just go there and roll up your sleeves and go to the places and do the work. You're an amazing researcher. Yeah. I don't know if we want to go to the friendship case just yet. I kind of want to finish up the Trinity case a little bit, but then we can talk about the friendship case, because I think that's a really interesting case, and I know you've researched it and talked to the people.
Case, 1956 in Pescara, Italy. And I'm living in Italy, right? So I did that. And that's the W-56s that were with the Italians. And I have their voice. I have their, what do you call it, the telephone call. Because the guy that wrote the book, Mass Contacts, about the friendship case, remember it's 1956, because people aren't even born yet. The guy that wrote the book, Stefano Brescia, trusted me so much, he gave me everything. He gave me the voices of the ETs, he gave me the photographs. He gave me the video footage. He gave me everything before he died. So I already knew about that friendship case. The friendship case, but I knew there was another one. and the guys from Friendship, the ETs said, we have tried this experiment with several countries, including Germany, and but the one in Chile is 1970s, 1980s. It's recent, and I'm going, whoa. Someday, this is the way I do it. So, okay, I know the one in Italy, 1956. You can ask me anything you want about that. Maybe someday I'll get to do the other one too. And so coincidentally, I end up there in Santiago, and I ask if they know Octavio Ortiz. It's on my YouTube channel for people who want the real thing. There's Octavio Ortiz and me in a restaurant, or us doing with an interpreter the question of the Chilean one.
So there's multiple friendship cases.
Absolutely, but you have to be like a nerd like me. You'd have to take like a timeline. Like, I love what I did here. I put everything on a timeline for the Latin Americans, so, and everything about on a timeline, and then all the books involved. So it isn't just that you. What can I say? I could go and talk to Stefano Brescia about friendship in Italy without having read the book. He's the ignorant. And what I find is that my own colleagues haven't read Trinity. So how in the world am I going to talk to them? What, do you read your own book and that's it? You don't read all the UFO books. You have to read. You have to read everything that comes out from the original source. I've read all the Roswell books. I've read all the books dealing with certain cases. I read Maelstrom Air Force Base missile shutdown. It's called, is it something giant? And I've talked to Robert Salas. But how could you talk to Robert Salas into doing an interview if I didn't read his book first? So, I mean, what kind of stupid questions would I ask? So I just have a different way of doing everything. And that's why when you talk to me, I can only answer from my own experience of having talked to the source. But if you ask me stuff like crop circles or whatever, I don't know because I didn't research that. Or, drones. I didn't research that. I didn't research. I research all that. I have to be there. I have to talk to the people. And then I have to figure out why they would be coming in the first place. So, there has to be an agenda behind whatever the event is. And the one in Chile is because they were healing people. They were putting people on boats and actually going to the island, and they had a technology of healing. And Fuentes was dying of lung cancer. He was a chain smoker and got completely healed. So, but that's that batch of ETs. I mean, when I talked to Clifford Stone, and he just died 2 years ago, and I used to go there at his house all the time. He trusted me. In fact, I helped publish his book.
He seemed like a
He
really
told
good
me
guy.
he was a good guy. I said, Clifford, how dare you say there's 57 different species of ETs? He said, because I had a first aid manual. I had their drawings on them. I said, first aid manual. He said, yes. He said, I did 12. He did 12 crash retrievals. Some of these beings were alive. And he said, and if they were hurt, he said, we would have to look at the manual to make sure that whatever we administered did not kill them. And I thought, wow, that makes sense. So you just didn't make that up. And then Colonel Corso told me, and he was my biggest story, that they had 52 species actually documented in the Pentagon. 52. So, and our field goes, yeah, there's reptilians, grays, and Nordics. And I go, and what was the thing then in Brazil that was running around? If you saw James Fox's movie, Moment of Contact about the Virginia case,
Yeah, and there's
that
an
doesn't.
interesting connection between that one and the Nazca beings in Peru, because there's a little figurine that was found among the bodies. There's a bunch of odds and ends that were found supposedly among the Nazca bodies. One of them is a head of what looks like the Virginia being with a little crest on its head and the shape of its head. It's the spitting image of the depictions that we have of the Virginia beings in a moment of contact. So yeah, a possible link between those beings in the more recent Virginia case.
Yeah, but people should. How could you not know about Virginia? I mean, I'm glad James made the movie, but the thing is, I knew about it because I went to the 50th anniversary of Roswell. That's where I met Colonel Philip Corso. I lived next to him by accident or design. But I went with Victoria Puccaccini, who had just done that case. We had just done the case, and I'm listening to Puccaccini, seeing all the other researchers in the bar with all their fans, and just not. They don't talk to each other. I don't know what to say. They don't like. And I'm looking and I go. Puccaccini told me everything, but the story that's interesting, Jack, is uh, so he was foreign, I was foreign. I flew in from Italy, he flew in from Brazil. But that's when Clifford Stone accosted us and said, "Come to my house, I have something to show you." And we were the only two to go. And we were sitting in his living room, and I have my little movie camera, and because I have to report back to my boss, Mauri Bayata of the magazine. I was writing for Area 51 magazine, and we're sitting on Clifford Stone's couch, and he comes out and throws a bunch of microfilm there in a big canister. And the canister had a date like 1957. I forgot. I filmed it. And then I send the film FedEx very fast back to my boss, and my boss calls me and says, "Paula, do you realize that was the Holloman landing on the coffee table?" And I said, "I didn't know what the Holloman landing was, so how could I ask him about it?" I didn't know anything about history. This is what people need to study this stuff.
Now, when you say the Holloman landing, are you talking about the few seconds that's publicly available, or are you talking about the full video?
No, he had 8 minutes of it.
Whoa, so wow. So what happened to that footage?
I called him and I said, "What you tell me?" And he said, "This is what happened. This is Clifford Stone." He said, "The CIA came and they said all the researchers in the world are going to be here for the 50th anniversary. Invite them to your house." So he did, and only two people came, the two foreigners. He said, "And put this on the coffee table with all the other microfiche that he had there. He had all kinds of other film footage." He said, "If they ask to see it, show it to them." Well, I didn't ask to see it because I didn't know what it was. My boss did because he saw the tag on it. And so I said to Clifford, I said, "What did you tell me? This is like historic. I didn't even know about the Hollywood." And Clifford said, "If you want to see what's on the first 8 minutes," he said, "go to the movie called It Has Begun." I think it's with Rod Serling. I know Jacques Vallée's in it. I know Burgess Meredith is in it. And he says, what they say the beings were like, which were dark-haired, Semitic-looking beings with maroon outfits coming off of the ship, is what's on that. And he says that, and then Emmenager, then you have to go study what Emmenager keeps telling people, and then he takes it back, and then he says it. He told Grant everything, so if you want to ask Grant, he was the only one to get the whole story out of Emmenager. When I interviewed him, he wouldn't tell me. It's like you're not you're not privileged enough. But there is some like 32 seconds in that movie of the ship coming down. It's either UFOs past, present, and future. It's called. I have copies called "It Has Begun." UFOs. It Has Begun. So, is there real government footage there? Yes. Is it short? Yes. What Clifford had was more, and he told me it was exactly like that film. But the CIA was right. The intelligence, nobody really cared. I mean, nobody wanted. I'm convinced. I know you're going to laugh when I say this. I'm convinced, Jack, nobody really cares anyway. Nobody cares about the real thing. Nobody cares about studying it seriously. It's like entertainment here. It's like a hobby. Nobody talks to anybody. Nobody looks at it, academically. And for somebody like me that is only doing it because I want to know, it's very frustrating.
Yeah, it's funny that they think that, I mean, one of the reasons given to us why they haven't given us UFO disclosure is because they're afraid society will collapse. Well, a lot of the normies I know who are into this, they might say, "Oh, wow, UFOs are real. Wow. Okay, when's the game on?" You know, I don't think people are going to run amok because of this. I think they're going to be like, "Oh, that's interesting. All right. What's for dinner? Do I need to take the trash out?" But I think it will impact them once they realize. I mean, if the technology is part of the disclosure, if they reveal free energy, healing devices, esoteric knowledge and wisdom, spiritual, consciousness sort of things that could impact everybody's lives, that's where things will get, that's when people will start taking it seriously and be more interested in it because it could affect their daily lives. So it just depends on what sort of disclosure we're dealing with and, how things go forward.
I love what you just said. Wow. You're a man after my own heart. You're right. You're so right. But you thought about this. I can see you thought about it. Colonel Philip Corso, and this is my book, Conversations with Colonel Corso, because he couldn't speak in the United States. I mean, I had the room next to him, so I was able to invite him to Italy. He was with us for 2 years and also signed a resolution for the United Nations, San Marino. Uh, when I go to do my presentations, I show Colonel Corso with us in San Marino, which is like Monaco. It's an independent republic. It's like Grenada in 1979 when they had a resolution. But when I was with him, I had my tape recorder in my pocket, so I would ask him the questions. And this is the real whistleblower. He worked in the Kennedy administration. He got the artifacts in 1961 from General Trudeau. He's working in R&D in the Army, though, in the Army, R&D. I mean, the Air Force doesn't have a Corso, and they're not going to talk. And when Trinity happened, it was the Army Air Force together. So the craft and all that stuff could have gone to the Air Force at Los Alamos. We don't know. But Colonel Corso kept stressing the Army, the Army, the Army. He'd say, I had, night screening devices. No, he didn't have, what he had was the lens from the ET that they pulled off, and it was a light collector. And he said they made night screening devices from that lens. So now I have to think, wow, those are little clones with what do you call it? Lenses? That's not an eye. And he said no. And he said that he was talking about a pen that he thought was a pen that he thought the batteries were dead, but there were no batteries in this thing. He put long low waves on it, took it to Fort Belvoir. He talks about all this stuff in the book. And he said a laser came out of it. So he said the laser was part of it. He said, but medical people used it to cut, also to suture. I mean, it could cut and then suture. And he said that a lot of these things that he had, were given to industry with the acknowledgement that give it to the industry first to enhance the competitive edge of the Army. And then he said, give it to the people. And here is 1961 in the Pentagon, in R&D, intelligence, because he had a background there where he helped the POWs. He did so much. And he's briefing Bobby Kennedy. You know Jack Kennedy. That's who his boss was. I mean, if people would just connect the dots, they would figure it out. It's like they need to connect all the dots. They need to know that the head of the CIA at that time was Jesse Angleton. Jesse Angleton was the one that pulled Michael Wolff out of his high school class because his IQ jumped up, and the science teacher called him and said this kid had contact. His IQ's jumped up, and Michael Wolff Provant is in Angleton's diaries. If people bother to look at it, but all of this that I'm talking about, because I know it's a lot for people is in connecting the dots. It has 28 individual interviews, starting with J. Allen Hynek, with whom I worked for 6 years in the beginning when I didn't want to know anything except put pins and maps. And it has Michael Wolff, it has Edgar Mitchell, it has John Mack, it has Zachariah Sitchin, it has David Icke, it has Jacques Vallée, and it has Monsignor Balducci of the Vatican, who was my friend. So I call Connecting the Dots the ultimate disclosure book, and I just translated it into Japanese for the Japanese. What I'm saying basically, because it's not about books, books don't make money, nobody reads any, is that if you want to know the information, you've got to go to the people that were there and did it.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and you have worked with such interesting people, and I need to read that book, Connecting the Dots. I have not read that. It sounds like there's some fascinating information in it. Okay, so I don't want to harp on it too much, but the footage of the landing, the Holloman landing, what happened to that? Is that anywhere? Did the CIA seize it?
Robert Emenager. You can ask Grant Cameron about that too, because Emenager talked extensively with Grant Cameron. The government, I teach a course for Politics Institute called Hollywood and Disclosure. There have been attempts, not only with Disney, not only with James Cameron, to do the Abyss, not only Avatar, with different, and let's not even talk about Spielberg. There have been attempts at testing the reaction of humanity from Hollywood. And so when Emenager and I forgot the other guy, it's not Sandler, it's Sanford were together, and they were going to make a movie. The government was going to give them the film footage. There's a lot written on the internet about that. They said, we want you to make this movie, we're going to give you some film footage. And they pulled back at the last minute. They pulled back. Now, why were they going to do that? To test the reaction of people. And just like, War of the Worlds with Burl Ives, not Burl Ives.
Orson Welles?
People were so scared, they got in their cars, some committed suicide and so forth. And that was in New Jersey. And that was not ready. The world was not ready. And then they have all these drones over New Jersey and the world is ready. So, it's like I'm going, okay, well, you have to look at the agenda, why something is done, when it was done. I think 1939 was War of the Worlds. I'm not sure. I have to go look because I've got everything on a timeline, because that's the only way I can make sense out of this. That the 1950s in Southern California was the giant rock era. 1953 was when Adamski saw Orthon in Desert Center, and George H. Williamson takes plaster casts of his feet. And this is a Venusian guy who says he comes from anywhere. And they're warning about nuclear, and the message is anti-nuclear, 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 whether it be Howard Menger, George Van Tassel, or Feo Angelucci. I studied all these people in the 50s with that message. Whatever is happening, and whoever's here, or whatever's going on, has a reason or an agenda.
Okay, all right. So getting back to the nuclear stuff, in Trinity, getting back to Trinity to finish that off, can you take us through that sequence of events? So there was a test of a H bomb or an A bomb, a nuclear bomb at Trinity, and this may have destabilized the flight of a UFO that then crashed. Am I understanding that correctly?
Because it crashed a month later.
Okay, they crashed a month later. Okay, so take us through that. What happened with this UFO?
In July, I think it was July 15th or 16th, the atomic bomb, it wasn't a test, Jacques says. The sad part about it, Trinity is a history book. The sad part about it is we didn't need to do that because the Emperor of Japan had already surrendered. But we needed they needed to test something. And so they used the excuse that it ended the war, but he had already, what do you call it, surrendered. If you watch Oppenheimer, Oppenheimer goes to say, Truman, why do we have to kill all the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Couldn't we just do one? But anyway, so it gets to be politically interesting. When it wasn't a test, bomb exploded in July, uh, 13 miles away on the Padilla Ranch. I told you that Jose's mother opened the door because she saw what she called the light of 1,000 suns, the sun. And she got blinded in one eye. And because of the sound of the boom, Jose lost his hearing. His ear began to bleed. He lost hearing in one ear. Remy, his bed went from one side of the room to the other, and they weren't even in the same house. So there's the bomb. A month later, these kids are fixing fences. And because in those days, they were, Jose was telling me he was driving a car at 9. He was riding a horse at 4. I mean, this is a different time. And so they heard a similar sound. And when they went over the hill, and there had been a storm, that's interesting for me because my thoughts are always, during Roswell, there was a very bad thunderstorm, and I've been in New Mexico during these storms. They're horrible. Thunder, lightning, and there was a storm, too, during this. Now, could the storm have affected the craft? Who knows? Who knows? But the craft did hit a radio tower, and there were pieces of that radio tower on the ground, and it hit the radio tower on the way in. It was circling that area. A month later, I wondered about even the crash. I said, did they do this because they knew we were going to look at this and make a statement about nuclear energy, the bomb, and so forth? Were they making a statement? Did they know that 60 years later I would be there? Did they know the future? Do they know that this isn't about the fact that they are on vacation in the middle of White Sands? I'm wondering, it brings back a lot of philosophical questions. And Jack, this is the reason why I'm really sad that this is not in a university and we can't be discussing this as a group of people instead of some hobby or something.
Okay. So this UFO is circling in the area, and something causes it to crash. Is this a malfunction? Is this a shoot down? What happened?
I can answer if it was a shoot down. It wasn't there. And a malfunction, how could I know? No, it just crashed, but it did hit the radio tower before it crashed. That's why the panel flew out and all the what do you call it? The eagle hair was all over the place. It hit the radio tower. The panel was off of it. So when the boys finally could get, 500 feet away, they saw the beings that they thought were children, and they thought they were hurt. I'm sure they weren't hurt, but anyway, they thought they were hurt, and there was a panel missing from it. But maybe if we were having a conversation, you and me, you could say, do they shoot them down? Yeah, they do. Now they do. If you listen to Stephen Greer's disclosure event last year, the guys that are shooting them down are talking about shooting them down. So yeah, the whistleblowers that he has are talking about shooting them down. So they do shoot them down. Do they actually fall because of our weapons? I saw some film footage in the offices of Jaime Maussan of a UFO over Israel and the attempts to shoot it down, and it had a force field around it, and they couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. And I also interviewed in one of my books, I have 7 books, Milton Torres, who in 1957 pointed a missile at a UFO the size of a football field in London, and he was asked to shoot it down, and he said the missile just wouldn't go. He couldn't unlock the missile. He was ordered to shoot it down.
Yeah, it
And
seems
no,
so weird that our mundane technology could ever take down a UFO. It seems so unlikely. There are, people that will say that has happened. And I know we have more modern weapons now, energy weapons and so on, that might be better at doing that. But I kind of hate the idea that we are shooting at UFOs, and until we know who the good guys and the bad guys are, there is some evidence that people in what I call the control group, these people that are reverse engineering these things, have been working with beings. Some of them are possibly these beings that were alive and survived these crashes, and some of them might not be. Some of them might be, independently working with humans. At least that's what various contactees, abductees have seen is government and military officials working alongside beings during these abduction events, which is really interesting. So you have any thoughts on that?
it's like, what would they? They don't need to work with anybody. They can do what they want. As far as our shooting them down, I had to go back to the 1950s again because you write novels and everything. The movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, and I interviewed Robert Short, who was one of the giant rock contactees. Robert Short was driving down from Northern California, and a craft landed in front of him, and being who looked like the guy from the movie came up to his window. And Robert Short's, and he's dead now, Robert Short, and he was the last survivor of the group of contactees at Giant Rock. By the way, Giant Rock used to have 33,000 people attending those conferences in the 1950s. You have to go backwards. And he's on my YouTube channel if you want to hear him say it. So the idea is, how do we react? In the movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, we shot the guy. When I was doing Latin American work, and the name of the book, and I don't have it with me here, is All the Above and Beyond. I talked to a researcher, Jaime Rodriguez, about a case in Peru in the Ecuadorian embassy where in 1970, a spaceman came walking in, and there's a secretary, there's all the ambassadors in that embassy and everything. And he said to them, "My craft is over your embassy. You can come out and see it." And the first words that they said to him is, "You know, we can kill you." And then they walked out with him. He said, "You can't," because he had like what do you call it, a monitor. He had like a crystal around his neck. His name was Von Ju. The Latin Americans know about these contacts with space people. And by the way, they can do what they want. And as far as is working with, I haven't found any evidence of that necessarily. They don't need to. And the thing, their agenda isn't necessarily that, because you had mentioned spirituality before. We could go to that at the end of the interview. But when I interviewed several people who about that incident at that embassy, and then I realized that after having talked to Glenn Steckling about Adamski and all those guys, that the space people were walking among humans. And they stopped doing that when the Betty and Barney Hill case came in 1963, and it all became abductions. But you don't need 40 years of DNA. You can get a glass. So we have to look at how they're being carried out, who, because when I was talking to Monsignor Balducci, it got really complicated. And he said to me, he was a demonologist. He said, the devil doesn't need UFOs. He said, there are entities that are not good, that could be contacting people because they attracted whatever, but they're not ET. So then it gets to be a mess, because I'm listening to everything. I'm listening to Monsignor talking about that. I'm listening to John Mack. He was with me in Rome. He was at my house for a week. I was his translator in Florence. I talked about all of his, changing his mind on a lot of stuff. And talking to experiencers, and then I realized that our field is contaminated with a lot of disinformation. Now, if A spaceman walks into an embassy. Our first ideas are going to, we can kill you.
Yeah, it's not super friendly, is it?
It's, and they said, well, when they walked out with him, he just corner. Well, I'm sure by now there's a lot of technology about, just what do you call it, dislocation, going from one place to another. You must have talked to Grant Cameron about this, because there's our our science is not adequate to explain paranormal, and paranormal is shoved in with this UFO stuff. It's
Absolutely.
shoved, yeah. And tell you a little story. If you read Trinity, the boys hid the piece in the sheepherder shack. I've been to that sheepherder shack. It's dilapidated now, under the floorboards. And the sheepherder wakes up the next morning, walks over to Mr. Bach and says, I have to leave this. I have to leave. I am freaked out. He said 3 little men came in through the wall looking for the tesoro, which is what the boys call the souvenir. Well, how do you explain to a sheepherder that 3 beings can come through a wall? And so that's part of what they told us. So, of course, Jose is going to go and move the piece. He's going to move it somewhere else because he had it there. But that's the paranormal that doesn't make sense. Like, a lot of paranormal weirdness around all kinds of this stuff happens. It's part of the dimensionality of the problem. And God, I wish, it's so interesting that if people would read the book, then we could have the discussion, or people would read other people's books. I've read everything. And just to tell you, I'm not going to talk about it, but you should read The Hair of the Alien by Peter Curry in Australia. It's covered by Bill Chucker, an incredible researcher, about DNA found after an encounter that Peter Curry
Yeah, I'm
had.
aware of that case. A very interesting case, and it also has a connection with the Nazca mummies, with the Asian Eurasian DNA. Uh,
In DNA. I mean, then I have to go look at Tibet. Then I have to go look at Mongolia. Then I have to go look at, because during the 1950s, the one thing I didn't mention to the people that are interested in this on an intellectual level is that's where Yogananda was. It was in Southern California. So these guys are not going to go to North Carolina. Whoever's coming off the ships, and they did come off the ships, spacemen, just like Von Jew, they're going to go to a place where the spirituality might match what they're thinking in the first place. And that's the jumpstart of the New Age movement. And Norman Paulson was part of that. He went down to the Integratron. The Integratron built by Van Tassel was financed by Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes gave the money.
how come nobody has rebuilt that? Well, why isn't there a new one of those?
You don't need a new one. Nothing happened to it. If you go there, you have to go there though. The people that do sound baths about it, so they make you. I did the sound bath there, but when I went with Robert Short, he explained to me, because he knew George Van Tassel very well. He said Van Tassel was told to put Tesla coils around it. He said, so Tesla coils, remember copper, Tesla coils, and everything. He was told by the Venusians that it was a rejuvenation chamber and a time machine. Now, the Tesla coils were taken off. All the copper was taken off. Well, it's still there, whole and entire. What's amazing, if you decide to go on vacation there, is it doesn't have one nail. It's all like Legos, what do you call it? It's like wooden Lego blocks.
Yeah.
It's all fit in, tongue and groove, or whatever it is. But I had to go there, and I had to talk to the people, and I had to see what happened back then. I had to see why 33,000 people would go to a conference. And there's a commemorative book out that's incredible that I have that I'm going to give to Rice University, where UFOs used to come right over their heads. I mean, I don't know how they call them or anything, but and all the guys were there. Menger, Van Tassel, Adamski, Bethune. You have to know all the early guys. And there were no little gray aliens, and there was no abductions. So you have to look at, I'm convinced anyway, there's a lot of artificial intelligence. Colonel Corso, if you read the book that he gave me, he said that he had seen the autopsy done at Fort Belvoir, and that what that thing was, he said, was a clone that had 4-lobe brain, and in one of the lobes it had a microchip. It makes sense because that's what we'd have to do if we sent somebody into outer space. But these are really heavy discussions that I'd love to have with the proper.
Yeah, yeah, Corso's description of that autopsy was so weird because he was talking about how the being was like grown or created to interact with the field generated by the ship, and its brain was like electromagnetically aligned. It was a wild, wild thing. Okay, to put a bow on Trinity. Okay, so their ship crashes. There's these three little guys to get out of it. What do we know what happened to those three little guys? Evidently, they're running around stealing back their equipment. So I guess they survived. They didn't get scooped up by the control group. Is that correct? Are they still, did they survive? What happened to the ship?
So I mean, they didn't leave the ship. They were sashaying back and forth. He said, I have to just listen to what the kid said. Sashaying for them were floating. And then the next day, when the sheriff and the dad went, they weren't there. So we don't know. I can't just, oh, they walked out and they went out. Well, we don't know. I mean, we honestly and truly, Jack, we have to just deal with data, what we know. We know they weren't there the next day. So Paula's thinking the same way you are. She's going, what happened? And then I'm talking to Clifford Stone. And he told me just before he died that they had so many bodies that anymore they left them out so their own could come and get them. I said, what? He said the last crash that he attended, which was in the United States, he told me where it was. He said, we just left the bodies out so their own could come and get them. Oh no, they
Interesting.
left them something. I said, now this isn't science fiction. This is a guy who worked in crash research, okay? And and by the way, it's so weird to me. You think this is normal? That I sit there and put my hand on my head, going, "Oh my God, this is like science fiction. This is like craziness."
Okay, all right, let's talk about the spiritual stuff and the consciousness aspect of all of this. And I want to hear about your own experience in Mount Shasta.
Well, I'm only looking at technology if I'm working in the United States because everybody's in technology. Colonel Corso is telling me that is talking to me about the research and development, and of course I'm very close to Stephen Greer. By the way, everything he says, we had the technology from the 1950s for anti-gravity. All that stuff is true. It doesn't phase on me because I mean there's nothing I could do about it. But and if Ben Rich is telling everybody that, and Ben Rich is the head of Lockheed Martin, we have technology taking me home, then we know that the major companies are benefiting in some way. That doesn't, whatever that is, that's interesting. And Stephen is very accurate in that. Okay. I didn't realize anything until I went to Latin America. And I was with Ricardo Gonzalez at Peruvian Andes. And I was following his footsteps. And I had done the interview with Ricardo. And Ricardo Gonzalez, when he was 24 years old, with automatic writing, they used automatic writing. I was told to go to the Chilca Desert in Peru, and he would meet with an extraterrestrial named Antaral. And so I went with him because we were making a movie with Rob Freeman and everything to retrace the steps. I went to the Chilca Desert. I stood where Ricardo met this being. He was camping. They tell him that they're going to be there. He was camping. He heard a clank, clank, clank in the desert. He was, I stood where he did this being. There's nothing in that desert. Nothing. That desert was used in the 1950s by Sisto Paswell's brother Charlie and all the Rama group, and they would fast and they would say mantras until the ship landed and the beings told them to come aboard. And this happened to 10 young guys and I talked to two of them that went aboard a ship, and they were space people. So anyway, I was following these footsteps, and I said to Ricardo, "Where does Antarel come from? Where did these people come from?" And he said, Antarel said to them that he comes from Alpha Centauri, and that they basically have a base in a planet that's in the constellation of Alpha Centauri. And if you study Ricardo, and he says that Hawking found this planet, that he talks about this planet. It's only 4 light years away. But the original base was in the Andes. And it's in a mountain, and I had a hard time going. It was 15,000 feet. I had to go over the Andes. I wasn't feeling well. I lost my vision. I can't even tell you what I went to go to that mountain. And we were in a bed and breakfast, and I saw Huascaran. The name of the mountain is Huascaran, which they maintain is the highest mountain on earth. And I'm watching this mountain, and there's a video of me, I think, on my YouTube. And I'm in a B&B. I'm in a bed and breakfast. And I walk, and the lady is making us, this wonderful older lady is making sandwiches. And I went to her and I said, do you know the people in that mountain? Have you ever seen that mountain? She said, oh, yeah. They came to speak to my son when he was 10 years old. And he says, my husband, who's a mountain climber, sees them on the trail.
Wow.
And I'm going, oh, I mean, I wouldn't know that. And then she went back to making sandwiches. She didn't want her own television show. She didn't go to conferences. She did not become, she did not do what we did. She finished the sandwiches, and I'm standing there, as I always am, in total shock, going, God, we do. And so I realized that from the 50s, where there was the Yogananda movement, the New Age, they couldn't get very far, whoever the human type beings were that were visiting. So they went down to Latin America in the 70s and began contacting people there. But Adamski even had, I think, a ranch in Mexico, and realized that the only connection you could have with a human is a heart connection. You can't have a brain connection. I mean, you didn't go to the same school. You didn't even go to school at all. I mean, it's like, what kind of connection would you have with a being? Really, seriously, what kind of connection could you have with a being? I mean, what would you have with a being like that? So you would have a heart connection. And then I thought, well, you know, it was hard on me because I needed an interpreter. I didn't understand the language, and I had done all this research down there. And I realized that the Latin American people have Peruvians, the Chileans. I was in Argentina, Mexico. You know, they just have big hearts, and you can connect with them. You said something, and you might want to say something about the bottom up. Did we have a conversation? You said, I think that there would be disclosures from the bottom up once to me. You said something like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it seems like to me, the way the phenomenon is working. Yeah, it's not, sitting down on the White House lawn, right? And it doesn't seem like the government is in a big hurry to disclose. So I don't think we're going to have top-down disclosure, but it seems like more and more people are interacting with the phenomenon on some level, and that is gradually spreading in awareness. And we're going to end up having this organic disclosure, or semi-organic, because the phenomenon is helping along. But we're going to have this more of a grassroots disclosure, where it's more of a bottom-up disclosure, where it's just working with everyday people, and not necessarily, coming through the president. And I guess hopefully, maybe the idea is when there's enough people, enough of the population is on board with this and pushing for answers and demanding answers of the government, then we can finally get oversight of these black programs that are doing God knows what, and we have real meaningful disclosure. But in the meantime, we can have our own contacts with the phenomenon.
God, I love that. And remember, we had a conversation about you're saying organic. You called it organic disclosure. I love that. In fact, I told you to write a book about that, because that's what it is. I mean, when I'm talking to people in Latin America, regular people, it's no big deal. Any place that has history or culture, like the Aztecs, the Mayans. I've spoken to Native Americans. I mean, they have, my God, Devil's Tower that's in Wyoming is not Devil's Tower. That's what the white man called it. It's Bear Mountain because the bear was chasing the Pleiades, the seven sisters, up the mountain and clawing up the mountain. We called it Devil because we had to do that stuff. But, and so Spielberg must have known that. The Native Americans, I mean, there were Native American, symbols all around Devil's Tower. I ended up going there because it was Close Encounters that started my career at 32 years old. I saw Close Encounters and started to cry at the very end, and I was teaching science fiction like what you write. I had no experience. I didn't care about any of this stuff. But when I was teaching science fiction, I saw the movie. I went to the Center for UFO Studies in Illinois because I was going to a wedding in Evanston. And I walked in, and there's Hynek, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, comes out as a cameo in that movie. And he knows I'm there, and he knows I speak Italian, and I have a master's in education. And he says to me, "Will you work with me?" So if I'm working with an astronomer, and he did Project Blue Book, and I was working with him until he died. I became friends with his family. Paula speaking now. I knew Paul when he was 13. Mimi or his wife. I'm with the real people. Like I was with Jacques Vallée for 5 years working on Trinity. There's no hoaxing anywhere. You can't. It's not a belief system. It's not do I believe. It's data. It's like, okay, this is real. What do you want to do with it? Get over it. What do you think is happening? And I learned about the spiritual agenda by going to Latin America, by the connection in Latin America, which hasn't been interpreted the way it is here. Here, it tends to be too much, I think, entertainment. There, it's serious. I mean, of course, they have a history. They have historical, like the Native Americans, indigenous people. You want me to talk about Shasta, but Shasta very quickly, when Ricardo came with all his Hispanic friends from Peru, they came from all Latin America. They would come once a year to do meditation near Mount Shasta. But with Ricardo Gonzalez, people that have attended his spiritual, P5s know that they tell them exactly what time they're coming. You don't have to wait. They'll say 9:32. Grant Cameron was with us. 9:32, they showed up over Grant Cameron's head and they flashed. But how does he get that? It's automatic writing. I don't know how to explain to people, but if you see people write automatically, the hand kind of goes by itself, and it's automatic writing, and so he get the time. My personal experience, and Grant has written a book about it, and he also came and photographed it, was that I was asked to go, and I refused to go many times because I don't camp. I hate it. I have camped since, camped in the Atacama Desert in Chile. I've camped everywhere, but this was 2014, and I had just met the Latin Americans. I had to go for 3 days without food, in freezing cold, in chemical toilets, with people. They gave me an interpreter, an Italian interpreter who spoke Italian, because we didn't speak the same language. And the last night I was there, I couldn't wait to leave because I was so uncomfortable. And Ricardo said that he got the message that if at 8:30 there was a flyover, that Antarel, his contact, was going to be in the forest. Well, I was watching the whole thing on night screening, and at 8:30 that there was a craft over our head, and he comes up and he says, "Can you handle it? You got to go. I can't go with you. You're going to go with 5 women. You're going to hold their hands. You're going to wait till a Zendra comes up." If you study the Latin American, get my book, All the Above and Beyond. The Latin America situation, there's like this mist that comes out of the ground. And they call it a Zendra, but it's like it could be a portal. It's force field. I don't know what you call it. But this was 11 o'clock at night. I saw this mist come up out of the ground. We were not allowed to use flashlights. I had to hold the hands of these of Mercedes and Suyapa, who I didn't. They didn't understand. I mean, nobody understood the language, so they didn't understand English. I didn't understand their language, and we walked down together. Then we let go of each other's hand, and when we let go of each other's hand, all of us saw a 10-foot tall being standing in a tree in Shasta, and I heard, and it wasn't in my head, in the forest, a language that I had never heard before in my entire, and I couldn't make sense of it. And all I could tell you was freaked out. There was no protocol. I didn't know what to do. You didn't know what to do. You saw this giant guy, and Ricardo's wife, I remember, started walking over towards him, and I thought, don't touch him, because I was thinking of Virginia, the virus thing, because I'm so logical. You don't touch what you don't understand. Was it a spiritual? Yes, because it turned my reality upside down. I heard the language he said. I didn't understand. It wasn't Spanish. I found out later that it was called Inti, which is a very ancient language. But he did say at the very end, I could hear it. I could hear it loud and clear, like a robot. He sounded like a robot. He said, "Thank you," and turned around and walked back in.
That's
And
amazing. Okay, so there's a 10-foot tall being. What did it look like?
see what he looked like. I pulled out his. Um, okay, he had a hoodie on, but this is what he looked
Wow. Okay, so 10 foot, I guess I would call that a Nordic being. Is that a tall white? Is that a Nordic? What is that?
like. Estonians, they're not Nordic. They don't come from Nordic. For me, would be more of the Venusians who look blonde like this, but not didn't have hair this long. This is an Apunian. He comes from Apu. He said he came from Apu,
Okay.
and he, I don't know, what does he look like to you? He looks like a and and his eyes are not blue like all that are. His eyes were brown, brownish honey, and I couldn't see his eyes. But Ricardo told me about a contact he had in Shasta, because I wasn't very good about this. Um, in other words, I wasn't very good. I was freaked out. I freaked myself out. I mean, I was. It wasn't because there was anything wrong with him. It's just that you live a certain life, and this changes your reality. I didn't ask for it, but I was invited. Just like Close Encounters, you're invited. I was invited, and I said to Ricardo, "I'm so sorry. I can't give you any more information." He said to me, Paola, he said, "I've had 6 encounters with these beings." He said, and he said, "The last one I had to go by myself, and I was freaking myself out like you, Paula." And he said, "I was walking down the hill like you." And he said, "I saw these little kids playing hide and seek, little children, human children at 11 o'clock at night. And my first thought was, where are their parents?" And the minute he said, I thought, where are their parents? I was inside the ship. So he said, and when he looked at Antarel, this is Antarel, he said, when he looked at Antarel said, "We had to put a hologram of little kids running around so you would relax enough so we could take you up, because you were freaked out." And I always thought, my God, thank God they didn't do that to me, because I couldn't have taken it. And so Ricardo laughs, because it's in his book. He says he turned down Tarell and he said, "Well, if you did a hologram with the little kids, you must be a hologram." And Tarell leans over to him, takes his finger and shows it in his chest, says, "I am not." So I thought, and Ricardo's his interactions with Antarel and Ivica, who says that she is a hybrid human and an Apunian. She's a female, and she's regular height. He's 10 foot tall, but happens in the Atacama Desert. That's why I camped out there twice, with 200 people who go there, and there are sightings that are on one occasion. Um, we were in the Valley of the Luna, the Valle de la Luna, and by the way, there's no flight paths, there's no airports. And I wanted to know, so I went with these people, and they're all Hispanic, and I'm sitting there, and I'm watching them recite mantras like for 2 hours, and then I see the ship right over your head, and Ricardo goes into the sand dunes and gets a message about the ecology of the planet. And the planet is in trouble. We aren't paying attention to ecology. We don't take care of Pachamama, the planet. We need to come together as a species. All these messages, and you wanted me to end with the spiritual agenda, means that we are one species human. That's it. And I remember what's his name, Edgar Mitchell, saying to me that when he was out in space, he didn't see any borders, and he didn't understand what the heck we were all killing each other for. And this is Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut that did the ESP experiments for me. And I met him so many times and talked to him so many times. And you know, Jack, one of the sad things was I asked him if he thought that the planet was ready for contact, and he said no. He said, unless the planet comes together as one species, he said, and John Mack said to me, unless John Mack, Dr. John Mack, I love that guy. He was wonderful. He said, unless we change our worldview to accommodate this situation, this phenomenon, whatever you call it, he said, it's not going to work. He said, it isn't that needs to fit into our science, which explained to me how you can go through a wall. You know, it's unless we change things, this species is not evolved enough to have the knowledge of being one with the cosmos. There are other planets that are inhabited, other species. I don't think everything is interplanetary. I think there's some dimensional species. We were talking about the Council of Nine, the only planet of choice. You have to read these things, you know, Gene Roddenberry getting his Deep Space Nine and everything by channeling the Council of Nine, which are disembodied entities. I call them cybernetics. You have to study all of this to realize that our reality is so darn complicated that it resembles science fiction.
I love it. I love it. I want to hear all about the Apunians. Who are the Apunians?
Well, the Apunians, okay, but can I suggest, I don't have the book here, and they can get it. It's called Contact from Planet Aku, because I had it. He said, do you know what happened? And he goes, no. Well, I don't know the date. It's like the 1980s. Two spacemen that were in the base in the mountain of Huascarán went to Vlado Kapitanovich, who was a Russian head of a hydraulic plant. And they had spacesuits on, just like you see the men, you know, in the day the Earth stood still. They had spacesuits on, and they said to Vlado, you're going to have an earthquake in Yungay, and part of that mountain is going to come off, and 40,000 people are going to die unless you move the people. This is going to happen. So Vlado, and you look up Vlado Kapitanovich. It's in all the newspapers, and this is in Peru, yeah, northern Peru in the Andes. He went to all, the dignitaries and said, "So the people, because I got this. These two guys came and told me this happened." Nobody believed him. There's newspaper articles on this. Part of the mountain came down. There was an earthquake. 45,000 people died. When I went to Yungay, and I went there, they could not find all the people's bodies. They just threw dirt over the whole entire village. And I'm walking over the bodies of these 45,000 people. And I'm looking at the mountain. And I know there's a base. And I know they warned us. Well, an earthquake is a natural disaster. So is a tsunami. So is, all the hurricanes. So are all the storms. So is everything. And these Hunians who look like us, I don't want to call them Nordics, they might be insulted, but they warned. And this happened in Peru, in Yungay, and they talked to the guy from the hydraulics plant. Now, when this happened, of course, the guy from the hydraulics plant had a relationship with these beings. And of course, we don't get this because it's a whole different story. I don't know what would happen. Maybe, but this is out of Peru. This is out of Peru. Just like we were talking about the friendship case, the one in Chile is the island of Chiloé. Otavio Ortiz told me that the ET that would look like human, he had short hair. He said he was journal looking. He came to the door and he talked to his wife and child and said, "We are healing people. We would love you to come to our island, and told them all about this." This isn't happening. It's happening in Latin America, just like the little being that ran around, Virginia and sees the three girls and they take him to the hospital because he's hurt. And Marco Charisse, who is the actual, military policeman that has the being on his lap. And that's why I was thinking that ends up dying, 2 weeks later because he has tumors because of the virus, because he didn't put a plastic between him and the being. The being didn't kill him. It's just a different structure of a being. Who knows where they came from? You can say where they come. Who knows? Who knows? This is data. This happened. The hospital, if you look at James Fox's movie, it's amazing, Moment of Contact. But I had already talked to Roger Lear, who wrote The Surgeon and the Scalpel, about this case, because he went down and talked to the surgeon who was going to do the operation on the being. So I read a book, Surgeon and Scalpel, about Virginia. I talked to Victoria Paccaccini. I know that these things happen. They don't usually maybe happen in New York City, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because you write science fiction. This doesn't even you couldn't even make this up. It's like, whoa, this is real stuff, and it's wow.
Yeah,
It's
well,
hard for
South America is such a hot spot, especially Peru. I go to these ayahuasca retreats, if you've ever heard of ayahuasca, and that originates from, the Shipibo tribe and other tribes that use this plant medicine in the Amazon in Peru. And yeah, and they've got the Nazca mummies. Peru is a really interesting place. Um, Okay, so getting back to the Virginia case in the surgeons, there was supposedly a telepathic communication between that being and one of the doctors. Something to the effect of, "I feel so sorry for you, you humans, because you're capable of so much, and you're not realizing it." I forget the words, but he says you're capable of so much, but you're not doing it. And I think the implication was like telepathic abilities and spiritual abilities and so on. So what's your take on that? Are you aware of that? And what do you think that being meant?
Oh, I can't even answer that because I never heard of that. It's not in book. It's not in Roger Lear's book. What that does remind me of is the movie Roswell that Paul Davis put out. Do you remember that being at the end
Yeah.
with Forrest, the being in the bed, and Forrestal's looking at him in that movie Roswell that Paul Davis did, and Forrestal just freaks out because the telepathic is where there's more of us coming, or something like that. Then he jumps out the window, which you wonder if he jumped out the window. But it's
Jumped.
no, I never heard that. You'd have to give me, I'm basically a teacher, so you'd have to give me not the hearsay. You'd have to give me where you got that from, what book, who told you, who was there. I don't. I didn't hear it. If you heard it, do you remember where you heard it from?
I'll have to track that down for you. Maybe somebody in the comment section can remember and remind us. But
Because it. come from somebody that was there, that got firsthand information. I know Roger Lear was there. James Fox, that movie, he was there. He got so much. And of course, Vittorio Paccaccini backed off. He was there in 1990. That's 1997 is when I was 50th anniversary of Roswell. So yeah, no, I don't know, but it sounds like plausible. It's just that I need to know like
Yeah, yeah, sure.
so.
I'll try to track that down for you, and when I find it, I'll send it to you. Okay, well, great. Well, so do you have any final thoughts or messages that you want to get across to the audience today?
I, you're great. I love talking to you.
I love talking to
It's
you. I've been wanting to talk to you for years, pal. I've been following you for a while. I love your work. I love your take on things.
well, it's an interesting conversation we have, and I miss that. Quite frankly, I miss it because you're so open that I mean, what I'm telling you is data, 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 data. I mean, it's stuff that I've gone there and talked to the people and put down the date. It's all that stuff is on audio tape because I've written 7 books and I don't remember anything. So I have to tape everybody. I have to take out the tape recorder and they have to talk in the tape. In my YouTube channel, which people can go to, it's video. So as I'm interviewing the Chile case, you see Octavio Ortiz there, or Robert Short in his living room, or and there's even like the friendship case. I had to go to Lake Como, where George Clooney lives, and interview Gaspare di Lama, who's in his 90s, and there's me and Gaspare. I had a problem because I was speaking to him in Italian, and I was trying to translate for the Americans what he was telling me, and that message is the message I could leave you with. 2 messages. I connected the data. It's all at Rice. It's in the books, but that isn't what's happening. What's happening is that we need to evolve and raise human consciousness, or we're toast. So we need to raise human consciousness. We need to go into we are all one. We are all children. We are all mothers. We are all one um, agenda of human species. That's one. That's my bottom line. That's why I love speaking in Japan, because they've got that message. It's easier. Here we're looking at the government for disclosure, and that's going to go on forever. And I think it's total distraction as to what the agenda is. The other thing that Gaspare di Lama told me, and it's on my YouTube channel, is the beings said that when they came, the W-56s, the beings that were in Pescara, Italy, with the 10 Italians, that they could stay with them as long as the Italians did not fight among themselves. Because the beings had a technology, they called it a technology. It's in mass context, Stefano Brescia's book, called Ureda. The technology was Ureda, harmony. If the ET beings could talk to the human beings and the human beings didn't fight among each other, that harmony could keep them here. It only lasted for about 10 years, and the human beings started arguing among each other. They started fighting. Oh, you saw them? Why didn't you tell me? You saw them? They sent you a message. They didn't send me a message, and all this kind of stuff. And so the beings from Pescara, the W-56, had to leave. But for me, the idea of calling harmony a technology was like fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. How would that work? Is that a consciousness technology? Is that a physical technology? What is that? That's so weird. I would love to know the details of how these guys work. And yeah, any thoughts
So
on how this technology works?
it's basically staying in harmony. It's a field of some kind,
Yeah.
like a force field. Field.
But it's a field that somehow depends on our consciousness or something. Resonance.
Well, yeah. Well, if you look at Buddhist philosophy, they basically look at love and compassion. It's not a religion; it's just a philosophy. And if you look at the real Christian philosophy, the two what do you call it, commandments of Jesus, poor guy, he'd be appalled if he did not care. But anyway, love God first, and then love your brother as yourself. I mean, isn't that a conscious? You're not going to kill him, hurt him, do pedophile, take him for everything he's worth. You're not going to hurt your brother as yourself. Those were the two commandments. That philosophy is like Uday the philosopher. And we're not doing any of that. So it's like so foreign, it's incredible. But they were basically messages given by great masters of how to live. So I'm not surprised ETs came and said, okay, we can live with you guys. By the way, I love doing friendship case because Bruno Samachicha that helped them live in the castle. One of the guys was 15 foot tall. So Tanel maybe 10, but one of them was 15. They had to build a bed. We're all vegetarian. And one of the problems was that they had to take truckloads of vegetables and fruits for them to eat, these ETs. And so the story that Brescia told me was that Bruno had to pay for all the vegetables and fruits for them, but they would take the driver of the truck into the cafe to have coffee. And when the driver of the truck came out, the truck was empty because they teleported all that stuff into the castle. And the driver was in shock. And these are the little stories that between Gaspeda, that was one of the experimenters. Thank God we got him. We always, just like with Remy and Jose is 86 years old. Remy died already. We wait so long to talk to these people. But when I talked to Gaspeda, he was 92, and he was telling me these stories of this real case. But then I asked you, where were you in 1950? This happened in 1956. So is it how can anybody even deal with it unless they go and research 1956? The Vatican knew that. If you read the book, all these famous people knew, and we got contact for a long time. Not necessarily in New York City, but we've had contact for a long time.
Okay, that's all incredible. I got to have you on the show again sometime to talk to you some more about this stuff. But for now, where can people find you? What current projects do you have that people should know about?
Well, first of all, I used to do big conferences in Laughlin. They were very intellectual conferences. I stopped doing that. So I'm doing small conferences in Crestone, Colorado. And to come to the what I'm doing in May is with Grant Cameron, who I consider a genius. He put it together in his consciousness based, everything is. And with Desta, his assistant, and me, I'm going to talk about these cases. Crestone, Colorado, and it is May 23rd, 24th, and 25th. And you can sign up at www.starworksusa.com. My company is starworksusa.com. I do master classes. I do the books, people don't read anymore, but I have 7 books plus Trinity. My own website where I talk about my latest research is paolaharris.com. I'm Italian. I was born in Italy. So my name is Paola, paolaharris.com. I mean, Paula Harris is fine. America, it's Paula Harris. But so that's what I'm doing if you look at my latest work. And by the way, the Peruvian stuff is there. And Starworks USA are the small conferences that I sponsor in Crestone, Colorado. And then I recommend that everybody do your what you call organic disclosure and find out for themselves. My job is just to share the real data.
Well, thank you so much for doing that and for being a wonderful voice and a researcher and for coming on the show and telling us all about it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking me.